Hello and welcome to the second day of the New Paradigm in Cosmology Symposium. My name is Dr. György Szabó and I serve at the Laszlo Institute of New Paradigm Research. Now we're going to start with Professor Laszlo sharing his reflections with us, followed by questions and answers. So this is the time to ask any questions you may have from him, apart from the winning lottery numbers, because for whatever reason, the Akasha paradigm has not conveyed such very important information to him. So please start to put your questions in the chat box. After Ervin finished his reflection, I will monitor the chat box and try to get him answer all the questions as possible, but due to time constraints, we don't have a huge amount of time. So over to you, dear Ervin.
Okay, György, thank you very much. And thanks all of you colleagues and to joining this little private celebration, which now becomes a public celebration as well. I think Carita and I, we both appreciate it very much. From yesterday, I think some of the questions that were loose questions that were hanging over, I think may have occurred to other people, certainly occurred to me. One is the question about science and spirituality. We are here in search of a new paradigm, a better paradigm, a more true paradigm to reality. And the question is, do we turn to science or do we turn to spirituality? My answer is very simple, we turn to both. And why? Because I recall a wonderful saying of Einstein's, not sufficiently quoted, I keep quoting it, but others should be too. It says, in science, we seek the simplest possible scheme of thought that will tie together the observed facts. That merits being recalled. Seek the simplest possible scheme of thought that will tie together the observed facts. Now, the observed facts are not just sensory facts, but we observe. In fact, we know that what our five senses convey is only a very small segment of the information that could reach us, that reaches our heart, our brain, or body. And even within that, we only are aware of a very tiny segment of it. You know, if you are to get as close to truth, to reality as possible, then we have to have as many observed facts to tie together as we possibly can. Now, science ties together more than everyday experience, because it goes beyond what the senses can perceive, beyond what we can even imagine in terms of our everyday experience. But spirituality can tie together even more facts, bring together even more facts, observed facts, because we sense through engaging in spirituality, engaging in altered states of consciousness, in non-ordinary states, and accessing data that would not be available otherwise, we get more facts to deal with. And some of these facts, probably maybe all of these facts, would be relevant to understanding what this world is and who are we in this world. In other words, constructing a more complete, integral new paradigm. So I say, look for all the facts that you possibly can, be open to all the observations, and try to seek to tie them together in a consistent, coherent way. Is that arbitrary? I don't think so, because this universe is coherent. It's more coherent than might appear on the surface. And I think if we find something more coherent in this universe among the observed facts, I think it's likely to reflect reality much more than randomness and pure causality or casuality. Now, another question that came up, and I will be then through very soon, was, is this universe better conceived as material or spiritual or ideal? Aristotle or Plato? I remember Deepak Chopra raising this question. I started out being an Aristotelian, but I turned into Platonics. I'll tell you why. Why I think now that Plato was really on the right track. Because the way to tie together the observed facts of this universe calls for assuming that there is more to this universe, much more, than on the level of observation. Some of the facts that we need to tie together are non-observable, are beyond the pale of actual observation, even enlarged spiritual observation. And nowadays we know, for example, the so-called implicate order, or the akashic field, or any of these things that, however we call them, the united quantum field, the grand unified field, all of these are phenomena that are not available to direct observation. We observe the effects, the results, the reflections, the manifestations, the projections, if you like. We don't observe the facts themselves. Plato talked about this. Plato and the Hindu seers before him, of course, talked about another dimension. Some of them called it the akashic, that dimension. Plato called it the dimension of the soul, the form, the ideas, even of love, which is there. I think this is probably the simplest way, more coherent way to explain what we perceive, what we actually can perceive, to assume that there is an entire dimension that we cannot perceive. Not arbitrary, because we want to use the simplest possible scheme for that entire dimension. Whatever, however we call it, it's a non-observable, pre-realistic, pre-universe dimension. It's the dimension of love, of oneness, of evolution. The laws of nature are in that dimension. Our connection to each other is in that dimension. And what we see are the effects of this as they play out in space and time. Because space-time is not in that dimension. Space-time is in the manifest universe. This deeper dimension is beyond space and time. That's the simplest way to explain things. Now, if we do that, how do we see what appears to us? Do we see it as material, as ideal, or both, or what? I think we are increasingly seeing it, but forgive me if you think this is just my predisposition, prejudice. Increasingly we see it as ideal. James Jeans was right 100 years ago. He said the universe is more like a great thought than like a great rock. It appears that the things that we come to recognize through the quantum dimension, through the quantum research, are more ideal-like than matter-like, ideal-like than matter-like. And I accept that. It could be that the cosmos itself is not a material entity. The cosmos itself is a giant consciousness, it's a mega consciousness, a cosmic consciousness. These are ultimate considerations, ultimate speculations, if you like. But it just throws light on the question, is the universe material or spiritual or ideal-like? I think it's more ideal-like than material. In fact, I very much question whether anything like matter, like pure matter, is given on the level of observation. I think Max Planck questioned it as well, and many great scientists nowadays do that. These are just my reflections. We live in a fascinating universe. We are exploring it in this seminar, various aspects, facets of it. We can consider it. We are open to considering whatever you come up with. We want to compare these various cosmologies, cosmological ideas and visions, and try to come up with the simplest, most logical scheme of thought that can indeed tie together what we observe, what we can observe, and even what we cannot observe, but have good reason to believe exist. Just this much as a preface to the further considerations for later on for digestion. Thank you very much for being here, for taking part on the second day. And thank you, Georgie.
Thank you so much. But just for a second, thank you very much for sharing your wisdom with us. Now, first of all, happy birthday to Jasmine Johnson. It is her birthday too, so double celebration today. The first question to you, Ervin, from Gerard Artson from Amsterdam. Shouldn't a new paradigm of cosmology help us understand the urgency of expressing our original oneness by living in right relation with our fellow beings and the planet?
Absolutely. We have to live together in harmony, in coherence. Nature is coherent. The only species, living species on this part of the universe, on this planet, is the human species that is ignoring the coherence. The others don't necessarily recognize it consciously or rationally, but intuitively. We are all coherent when we are natural, when we live up to our real nature. So absolutely, I would say yes, we have to live as much in coherence with each other as we possibly can, because that's the mass, that critical mass that can spread. If we become one with others, I think others will become one with each other and with us as well.
Thank you, Ervin. Next question is from Professor Paul de Vierville. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly. What is the impact and relationship of the ET, UFO, UAP, and other than human intelligences on Earth's humanity?
I think to assume that we are the only intelligence in the universe is an incredible sophistry. There must be others. And I think we're increasingly getting signs that there are others, that they're even being visited by other intelligences. Certainly there are other intelligences. And if we seek coherence among others, among ourselves, we need to think about extending that coherence, that oneness, to other intelligent species, if and as they will manifest themselves to us. But certainly I believe that the larger community of life in this universe is way beyond the planet, way beyond the solar system. And I think we are getting some indications. Let's be open to them.
Thank you. So the next one is from Glenn Strait. What is the place of personal gender identity in the mind and consciousness?
Personal identity, extremely important. The problems of our time stem very largely from a narrow personal identity. We are we, the others are others. Other species are not our species, and therefore we are only responsible for who we are or what we are. And it is a tremendous mistake. It's a fault in our thinking. Our identity has to be expanded. We have to embrace in our knowledge of who we are, in a recognition of who we are. All human beings, and even all forms of life, we are all part of this sphere of life. And our identity is the same as that. There are no others, no foreigners. I am who I am because you are what you are. And that goes for my dog, that goes for chimpanzees, and that goes for all forms of life, even trees and plants.
Wonderful, thank you. Now here is a great question for you from Suzanne Taylor. If you run the world, what's the first big thing you would do?
If I am what?
If you run the world, if you would run the world, if you would be the head of the world, the leader of the world.
Yes. Pray, I suppose. Seek guidance, see my oneness with others around me. I cannot run it as one. We can run it together, but we have to join together to govern ourselves. We must have self-governance on this world, not running it from above or from any one quarter. We must together run the world. And I would seek others so that we can all wake up together and run ourselves for our own benefit and for the benefit of all life.
Thank you. Well, just one more question. Some of the questions, actually, the answers you can find in many of Ervin's books. But maybe here is the last one. What is the relation of the cosmic mind to the akashic field and your theory of cosmology?
I don't think there's a separate cosmic mind. The akashic field is a kind of a cosmic mind. It's perhaps the cosmic mind. I can't say that there would be something like a mind and the field in the field. The field itself is the mind, is the consciousness, is what encompasses all things. I am much more holistic than being able to accept that there's a relationship between two things. There is only one thing, and all things are properties of that one thing. So the akashic field is a consciousness. We can enter into it, we can communicate with it, we find our own self in it, our identity in it, but we can't say that the akashic field has a property which we call consciousness. Consciousness is it. Consciousness is Schrödinger said that consciousness is one, there is no other thing than consciousness. In that sense, I would accept that, yes, consciousness is, not has, not is being possessed, not is harbored. Consciousness is, and we are part of that is.
Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and knowledge with us.
Thank you for all the people who are asking questions and following the symposium. These are the kind of questions we should look into. We should follow up without dogmatism, openly, because they are important, I think, for ourselves and for our future.